Viewer discretion is advised. This video contains unsettling descriptions and disturbing real-world phenomena. Imagine you're driving alone. The road is the kind you've taken 100 times. 2 lanes, no streetlights, trees on both sides so thick they block the sky. It's late, you're not thinking about much, and then your headlights catch something on the shoulder. A deer, standing just off the road, maybe 20 feet from your lane. You slow down automatically. You've done this before. You know how it goes. You wait for the moment it bolts. That sudden sideways leap into the dark that deer always make when headlights find them. It doesn't bolt. You slow down more, it still doesn't move. And that's when you notice the first thing. It's looking directly at you. Not a sideways glance. Not the nervous flick of the eyes that deer do when they haven't committed to a direction yet. It's looking at you the way something looks at you when it has been watching you for longer than you realize. You pull to a complete stop. The deer doesn't move. You sit there, engine running, foot on the brake, and something starts to happen in your chest that doesn't have a clean name. It isn't fear exactly. It's the thing that comes before fear. The thing your body does when it has already registered something wrong, before your brain has caught up to explain what. The deer is too still. Not the frozen stillness of an animal assessing a threat. That kind of stillness has a coiled quality, a tension you can feel across a distance. This stillness has no tension at all. It is simply motionless in a way that living things in your experience are not. And then it moves. The first step is wrong. You don't know how you know that immediately, but you do. The motion is just slightly out of sync with itself, like watching a video where the audio is half a second behind the image. Each part of the body moves in a sequence that almost matches a deer's walk, but doesn't quite land, doesn't quite arrive where it should. It turns toward the trees. It doesn't get startled. It doesn't bolt. It doesn't rush. It walks, controlled, deliberate. One foot placed in front of the other like something that has decided it is finished here. You watch it go. You keep watching, waiting for the moment it breaks into a run the way every deer eventually does. It never does. It walks into the dark between the trees, and then it's gone. At first you thought it was a deer. Then you realized it wasn't acting like one. Across rural America, people are reporting the same type of encounter. Not the same animal, not the same location, not the same time of year, the same experience. An animal that looks completely normal until it doesn't. Most witnesses don't notice it right away. There is no single dramatic moment where everything becomes clear. The realization happens slowly, the way real discomfort usually does. A movement that doesn't quite match. A stare that lasts a few seconds too long. A feeling that something is off before they can explain why. There is now a name for what they're describing. People call them not deer, and the number of people who say they've seen one is growing. To understand why these encounters are so unsettling, you first have to understand the animal at the center of them. Deer are one of the most familiar creatures in North America. Most people have seen dozens, in fields, at the roadside, in backyards at dusk. They are woven into the background of ordinary life in a way that few wild animals ever are. Your brain has a deep, automatic understanding of what a deer is, how it moves, how it reacts, what it does when it senses danger. That understanding was built over years of quiet observation, often without you even realizing you were learning. That familiarity is exactly the problem. When something familiar behaves incorrectly, the brain doesn't simply get confused. It reacts, not with curiosity, but with alarm. There is a specific, deeply wired response that fires when your mind expects one thing and receives something close, but not right. Researchers who study perception call this the uncanny valley, that narrow space where similarity and wrongness coexist, producing a revulsion that is immediate and completely involuntary. The fear in these encounters doesn't come from something monstrous crawling out of the dark. It comes from something ordinary, something safe, something mapped and categorized and filed away as harmless, suddenly stopping to make sense. Not because it looks wrong, because it almost doesn't. The most commonly reported encounters follow a recognizable pattern: a driver, a dark road, a deer caught in the headlights, and then nothing happens when it should. Deer hit by headlights react immediately. It is one of the most consistent behaviors in the animal. A sudden lock of the muscles, a rapid assessment, and then movement. They don't stay in the open. They don't linger. they go. It is as close to a guaranteed response as nature offers. Witnesses describe something entirely different. A deer standing in the road longer than any deer stands. Not frozen in a biological sense, not locked in fight or flight calculation, just staying. A deer watching the car approach instead of reacting to it. Crossing the road slowly, one unhurried step at a time, while the driver sits with their foot on the brake and waits for the motion that should have already happened. It's the hesitation that people describe most. Something that every instinct in its body should be screaming at to move. Doesn't. What makes this pattern so difficult to dismiss is the consistency. Different people, different roads, different states, different years, and yet the same details surface again and again. The stillness that goes on too long, the absence of the reaction that should be there, the slow, unbothered movement that eventually follows. People who have never spoken to one another, who never read each other's accounts, who grew up in different parts of the country, describing it in the same words. At a certain point, coincidence stops being a satisfying explanation. Now let's isolate the detail that appears more often than any other: the staring. Witnesses describe deer that hold eye contact in a way that deer simply do not hold eye contact. Not a glance, not a brief visual scan before choosing an exit. A sustained, tracking stare that follows movement with something that feels like intention. They describe turning their head and the deer's head turning to follow, slowly, steadily, without the twitching, high-alert nervousness that every wild animal carries in the presence of a threat. They describe being seen and the creature remaining completely still afterward, not calculating an escape, not reading the environment, just watching, continuing to watch, even after the witness has clearly noticed it, even after the moment when any normal animal would have interpreted that direct eye contact as danger and acted accordingly. This is not prey behavior. Prey animals monitor threats in order to escape them. Everything in a deer's moment-to-moment existence is oriented toward an exit. The angle of the ears, the position of the body, the tension in the legs. The body is always already halfway to leaving. What these witnesses describe doesn't look like an animal calculating when to run. It looks like something that has already decided it isn't going to. A deer in motion is one of the most fluid things in nature. Each joint engages in sequence. The weight shifts before the step lands. The whole body participates in every movement. There is a logic to it that runs so deep your brain processes it without thinking. You don't analyze a deer's walk. You simply recognize it as correct, which means when that logic breaks, even slightly, even in a way you can't immediately name, you feel it before you understand it. Witnesses describe movement that is stiff, segmented, like watching something that has learned how movement works without having spent a lifetime doing it. A slight delay between what looks like intention and what the body then executes, as if the signal is traveling a fraction of a second longer than it should. A gait that is almost correct, almost natural, almost what it should be. They are not describing something visibly damaged. They are describing something that appears entirely intact and moves like a copy made by something that studied the original without ever living inside it. It's not how it moves, it's how close it gets to moving correctly. Up to this point, most of what we've described happens at a distance, from inside a vehicle, across a road, far enough away that the encounter ends when you drive forward, when the headlights sweep past, when the ordinary rhythm of the night resumes. Not all of these encounters stay at a distance. There are accounts, and there are many of them, where something standing at the edge of the yard is just standing there when someone steps onto their porch, not grazing, not moving, not doing anything a deer normally does near a house, just waiting in the way that things wait when they are not in a hurry. Witnesses describe waiting for it to leave. It doesn't leave. They go back inside and return. It's still in the same position. They make noise. Nothing changes the situation. Nothing produces the reaction that should come. Others describe walking toward it, a reasonable thing to do when you're sure you're looking at an ordinary deer, and noticing something shift in themselves as the distance closes. Not in the creature, in their own chest. A growing recognition arriving just slowly enough that they are already closer than they should be by the time it reaches them. But the most consistent detail in these accounts isn't what the animal does when approached. It's the silence. Not simply quiet, the specific, total silence that falls when every other living thing in the surrounding area stops making sound at the same moment. Insects, night birds, the frogs along the water, all of it going absent at once. In a way you notice the way you notice a sound cutting out. Not because of what arrives, but because of what leaves. When that silence falls, witnesses describe a sudden, absolute certainty that they are the only thing in the immediate environment that is still breathing. This is no longer observation. This is something else entirely. There is one aspect of these accounts that consistently receives less attention than it deserves. It may be the most important detail in all of them. Many witnesses report that something felt wrong before they saw anything. Not during the encounter, before the headlights found the shape at the shoulder, before looking up and realizing the thing at the tree line hadn't retreated, before any of that, a feeling, a low source, less unease that arrived without a trigger. The kind that makes you slow down on a road you've driven 1,000 times without slowing. An instinct that fires before there is anything to be instinctive about. Witnesses don't describe being struck by sudden terror. They describe something subtler, a low-frequency signal running beneath conscious thought. The sense that some part of them has already understood the situation and is quietly waiting for the rest to arrive. This isn't mysticism. The brain is not passive at any moment. It processes constantly sound, peripheral movement, the behavior of every living thing within sensory range. It runs comparisons against accumulated experience at a speed no conscious thought can match. Sometimes it arrives at a conclusion well before it passes that conclusion along. The brain notices something first, the eyes catch up later. Before we go any further, let's be honest about what the known world can account for. Chronic wasting disease is a prine-based neurological illness affecting deer, elk, and moose across North America. First identified in 1967, it has since spread to populations across more than 30 states, including the rural regions where the majority of these encounters are reported. In its advanced stages, infected animals lose their fear of humans, hold still when they should flee, stand in open spaces they would normally avoid, and move in ways that are stiff, uncoordinated, and deeply wrong to observe. A deer in the late stages of chronic wasting disease can stand on a road and not react to a car. It can watch you approach and not move. It can look in a way that reads as something other than what it is. Beyond disease, injuries change how animals carry themselves in ways that low light and distance can transform into something else entirely. And perception is never neutral. The human visual system, operating in near darkness, fills in gaps with assumptions at every moment. What we remember often reflects expectation more than reality. For many of the encounters described under this phenomenon, possibly for most of them, these explanations account for everything, but not all of them. If you've ever seen something that looked completely normal but felt wrong in a way you couldn't explain, comment the word wrong below. And if you're into real unexplained phenomena, subscribe, because this gets deeper. The challenge with chronic wasting disease as a catch-all explanation is that the disease is degenerative. It removes function, it diminishes. Witnesses who have seen diseased animals describe them as confused, disoriented, unaware, caught in the particular vacancy of a creature whose neurological systems are shutting down. That is not what the most detailed accounts in this phenomenon describe. They describe something that appears aware, functionally, attentively aware. An animal tracking movement with its eyes in a way that requires directed focus, responding to being watched, not with the blank reaction of impairment, but by continuing to watch. An animal whose behavior follows a logic, just not the logic of a deer. These accounts come from hunters with decades of field experience who have encountered diseased animals and know precisely what that looks like. From farmers who have spent their entire lives on land that borders the same forests, watching deer move through their fields every evening. From wildlife photographers trained to read the difference between a startled animal and a sick one. These are not people who mistake disease for something unexplained. They have seen both. They know the difference. The detail that separates the unexplained accounts from the explainable ones is not visual. It is not the wrong movement, unsettling as that is. It is not the stillness, disturbing as that is. It is the quality of being looked at. That sensation of being observed not incidentally, not as part of an animal's threat assessment, but deliberately with something that witnesses consistently struggle to categorize because it simply does not belong in the face of a deer. That does not appear in any description of a diseased or injured animal. It appears only here, across unconnected people, in unconnected places, across years that share nothing except the conclusion they produce. Something was there, it was aware they were there, and it was watching. The term "not deer" is recent. It didn't come from researchers or wildlife agencies or academic literature. It emerged from online communities, rural forums and discussion groups where people who grew up far from cities share experiences that don't fit anywhere else. The name itself is almost deliberately plain. It doesn't reach for mythology or the supernatural. It simply says what it means. It looks like a deer. It is not a deer. What happened as the term spread is worth noting. These stories usually follow a predictable arc online. The details escalate with each retelling, exaggeration accumulates, and the original account gets buried. That didn't happen here. As the name circulated and more people came forward, the descriptions became more consistent, not less. More people arriving independently at the same details. The wrong stillness, the stare that follows, the movement that is almost correct, without having read each other's accounts first. The folk tradition of animals that are not what they appear is old in these regions, older than any written record of these mountains. But the shared language, a way of saying, "I saw this thing, and you did too, and neither of us has an explanation, but we both know what we're describing," that is new. Is this something people are inventing? Or is it something people are only now finally starting to name? There are encounters that sit beyond what the previous sections can comfortably contain. A woman in eastern Tennessee describes seeing a deer near her property line for 3 evenings in a row. The first night meant nothing. The second, she noticed it was standing in the exact same spot, not approximately the same location. The same spot, confirmed by the impressions she found in the soft ground the following morning. On the third night, she brought her husband outside. When they stepped out together, the animal turned its head toward them immediately. Not startled, not scanning, as though it had been waiting for the door to open. It looked at both of them in turn, one and then the other, and her husband said, before she told him anything about the previous nights, that something was wrong with that thing. They went back inside. 20 minutes later, it was gone. The hoof prints the next morning were pressed several inches deeper than normal deer tracks. They stopped at the edge of the tree line, as though whatever made them had simply ceased to exist at that point. A hunter in western Kentucky was tracking a deer one morning when he noticed a doe standing motionless at the edge of a clearing. He held still and waited for her to move. She didn't. He waited close to 15 minutes. Then he realized he hadn't seen her breathe. He watched carefully for another full minute, close enough, the air still enough, that the rise and fall of an animal's sides should have been visible. Nothing. She was standing in a stillness that had no life in it. He backed away. He'd covered 30 yards when he heard hooves on frozen ground behind him. Clicking. Deliberate. He turned. The clearing was empty. He did not go back. What both of these accounts share, and what runs through every encounter at this end of the spectrum, is the same thing. The sense that being observed was not incidental, not a byproduct of the animal registering a nearby presence. It was the point. They were not stumbled upon. They were found. Let's go back to the road. The driver from the beginning of this video, her name is Sarah. She gave permission for it to be used. She had been coming home from a late shift on a county road she had driven twice a day for 7 years. She knew that road the way you know a route you've never had to think about. Every curve, every stretch where the tree line opens and then closes again. She had no reason to be afraid of it. She told a researcher that she felt something change before she saw anything. Not in the road, in the car, in the air inside the car. The same road, the same speed, the same dark, but with a quality that hadn't been there a moment ago. Something she described as thickness. She slowed down before she had a reason to. 2 seconds later, her headlights found the shape at the shoulder. She said it was the eye contact she remembers most, not the stillness, though the stillness was wrong, not the movement, though the movement was worse, the eye contact, because the animal's head was already turned toward her lane when the headlights reached it, already oriented toward the space her car was about to occupy. It had not just noticed her, it had been waiting for her to arrive. She described its eyes as calm, not blank, not glassy, calm, like something for which fear had always belonged to the other side of the encounter. She sat there for close to 2 minutes. She said the rational part of her mind spent the entire time generating explanations. Sick deer, stunned deer, injured deer, and discarding each one, because none of them accounted for the expression on the animal's face. She used that word deliberately. Expression, the sense that something behind those eyes had already assessed the situation and reached its own conclusions about it. Then it moved. She said the first step was the moment the explanation stopped coming. The movement had a quality she still has no word for. Not injured, not disease. Something that resembled motion the way a recording resembles a voice. Close enough to recognize, with something missing that you can feel but cannot name. It crossed to the tree line in 8 or 9 steps. It did not look back. It did not rush. It walked into the dark between the trees the way you walk through a door into a room you know well. What she has never stopped thinking about, in the years since, across all the ways she has tried to make sense of it, wasn't the stillness or the wrong first step. It was the last one. Because in the half second before the dark took it completely, half in the open, half already gone, it stopped. And it turned its head back toward her one final time. Not startled, not checking, something else. Then it was gone. Sarah drove home. She has not taken that road since. Here is what this is actually about. Not the animal, not the woods, not the tracks that stop at the tree line, or the doe that doesn't breathe. The fear is not that something is out there, hiding in the dark between the trees. The fear is that something familiar, something your brain has always, without hesitation, filed under safe, is capable of being something else entirely, and that the gap between what it appears to be and what it actually is can be narrow enough and subtle enough that most people drive right through it without ever knowing. Most drivers who have ever passed a not deer on a rural road at night almost certainly had no idea. The moment came and went in 2 seconds. A deer at the shoulder that didn't bolt, a shape in the dark that held still a beat too long. And then the car was past it, and the road resumed, and the night returned to its ordinary quality, and there was nothing left to question. If you didn't stop and look, if you didn't happen to slow down at exactly the right moment, if your headlights didn't catch it at exactly the right angle, if your body didn't sound the alarm just in time, you would never know. You would drive home, you would go to sleep, and in the morning, nothing would be different. Because the most disturbing part isn't that they exist. It's how easily you could see one and never realize it. We don't know what the not deer is. What we do know is that the accounts keep coming from people with no connection to each other, in places with no connection to each other, producing the same quality of experience and the same quality of dread. People who entered their encounters without a framework for what was about to happen and came out with the same conclusion, that something was there, that it knew they were there, and that it was not what it looked like. Subscribe to The Silent Scream for more real, unexplained phenomena. And tell me, have you seen something like this before? Was it a deer or a different animal? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.